Welcome to The Explainer. We're going to tackle one of those huge questions today. One of the oldest and most profound and most personal questions humanity has ever asked. For literally thousands of years, the greatest minds have wrestled with it. And if you've ever wondered what it means to really live an examined life, well, the journey has to start right here, at the source of your own experience, yourself.
It seems like such a simple question, right? Who are you? You think, well, I'm me, of course. But any easy answer you have is probably not the whole story. The fact that it's hard to answer is actually a sign of a lively, curious mind.
It's like the writer H.L. Mencken warned, to every complex question there's a simple answer, and it is clever, neat, and wrong. So if you start to feel a little lost on a topic you thought you had figured out, don't worry. That feeling of confusion, that's not a sign you're getting it wrong. That's the very first step toward a genuine insight. Okay, so let's dive in. We're going to go on a pretty wild ride through thousands of years of human thought. We'll start in ancient Greece, jump over to the East, and then land right back inside the modern brain. Here's our roadmap for the journey. First up, we're starting in ancient Greece. These are the ideas that basically built the foundation for how the West has thought about the self for the next 2,000 years. So much of our modern thinking is built on this. So you've got the great philosopher Socrates, and he comes up with this pretty radical idea for his time, dualism. He basically splits reality in two. On one side, there's the physical world, everything we can touch and see, but it's always changing, it's imperfect. And then there's this other realm, an unseen world of perfect, eternal, unchanging ideas, what he called forms. Think of it like this. You can see a bunch of beautiful things in the world, right? But for Socrates, there's a single, perfect, unchanging idea of beauty itself that exists in that higher world. And then his student Plato, he just completely runs with this idea. For him, our soul is our true self. And that's where it belongs, in that perfect, eternal world. Our body, with all its deceptive senses and messy desires, well, that's just a temporary prison. In fact, Plato thought the body is what holds us back, dragging our soul down into this confusing physical world and keeping us from what's really true. And he came up with this amazing analogy to explain it, the chariot. Picture this, your soul is a chariot. The person driving it, the charioteer, that's your reason. Now, the charioteer has to control two powerful winged horses. One is a noble horse. That's your spirit, your sense of honor, your courage. But the other one, it's this wild, unruly beast, and that represents all your physical appetites and desires. The whole struggle of life, according to Plato, is about your reason trying to get these two powerful horses to pull in the same direction, to guide your soul upward toward wisdom. Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. While all this is happening in the West, a completely different idea about the self is popping up in the East. And believe it or not, it starts with the exact same metaphor, a chariot. So around the 2nd century BCE, there was this famous debate between a Greek king ruling in India and a Buddhist monk named Nagasena. The king asked him, "Who is Nagasena?" And the monk just turns it right back on him. He asks, well, what is a chariot? Is it the wheels, the axle, the pole? He breaks it down to show that chariot is just a convenient name we give to a collection of parts. You take away the parts, and there is no chariot left. And this is the perfect side-by-side comparison. For Plato, the chariot is a metaphor for a real, unified, eternal soul. But for Nagasena, it proves the complete opposite, that the self isn't some real permanent thing at all. It's just a convenient label we put on a temporary pile of physical and mental parts. So, okay, if the self is an illusion, then why does it feel so incredibly real? Well, Eastern thought has a word for this, ahamkara. It literally means I maker. It's not a thing, it's a function of your mind. It's the process of identification. It's that inner voice that latches onto a thought and says, that's my idea, or feels an emotion and says, I am sad. It's the process that creates that constant feeling of being a separate me. But hey, this whole debate wasn't just an East versus West thing. Nope. About 2,000 years after Plato, the West started having its own major internal argument about the self, and it started to sound a lot like what the Buddhists were saying. So first you get René Descartes, right? The father of modern philosophy. And he basically doubles down on Plato's idea. He starts doubting everything he can possibly doubt. His senses, the world around him, everything. But he finds one thing he just can't doubt, the fact that he's doubting. The very act of thinking proved he existed. So for Descartes, the self was simple, a thinking thing, a mind or a soul, totally separate from the body. But then, a whole new way of thinking comes along called empiricism. And these guys argued that all knowledge comes from our senses. You don't have any built-in ideas. You know things because you've seen them or heard them or touched them. And this was going to have huge consequences for the idea of the self. And that brings us to the great Scottish skeptic, David Hume. He took this empiricist idea and ran it to its logical conclusion. He said, okay, if all knowledge comes from experience, I'm going to go find myself in my experience. So he looks inward, searching for this stable thing called David Hume. And what does he find? Absolutely nothing. Just like the quote says, all he ever finds is a constant stream of perceptions, heat, cold, light, shade, love, pain, a non-stop movie but no one in the audience.
So Hume's conclusion was just as radical as the Buddhist monks. He said, the self is a fiction. It's just a bundle or collection of different perceptions that are succeeding each other with incredible speed. We make up the idea of a stable self just out of habit, but there's no solid core there. There's no permanent you to be found.
Well, Hume's argument really shook things up. It basically woke up the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant thought Hume was right. You can't find the self as an object in your experience. But then he had this brilliant breakthrough. He said, of course you can't. That's like trying to use your own eye to see your own eye. The self isn't another perception in your mind. The self is the thing that's organizing all those perceptions in the first place.
Right. So for Kant, the self is this active organizing principle. It's what takes that chaotic bundle of sensations that Hume was talking about and weaves them all together into the single coherent experience we call reality. It's kind of like the operating system on your computer. You can't find it as a file on your desktop because it's the thing running the whole show, making everything make sense.
Kant's idea was a total game changer, and it really set the stage for how we talk about this stuff today. The search for some kind of non-physical soul kind of faded, and instead, scientists and philosophers started looking for the self in two main places: our own subjective experience and, you guessed it, the physical tissue of the brain. So now, the conversation usually splits in two directions. You've got the materialists, who say the mind, the self, consciousness, it's all just brain activity, period. To understand the self, you just got to understand the neuroscience. But then you have the phenomenologists, and they say, whoa, not so fast. They argue the self isn't the brain, it's our actual lived experience of being a person in the world, where your mind and body are totally inseparable. Okay, now get ready for the most extreme version of that materialist view. It honestly sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it is a serious philosophical position. It's called eliminative materialism, and it basically claims that our entire way of talking about our minds, using words like belief, desire, joy, pain, it's all completely wrong. It's a primitive kind of folk psychology that will one day be totally eliminated and replaced by a purely scientific language of neuroscience. And you might be thinking, why would anyone believe that? Well, the arguments are actually pretty strong. First, they say folk psychology is terrible at explaining huge things like how we sleep or learn or what mental illness is. Second, they point to history. We used to have folk theories about fire involving something called phlogiston, until science gave us oxygen. They think our idea of belief is just like phlogiston, a placeholder we'll eventually throw out. So all of these huge, mind-bending debates bring us right down to a really personal, practical question that a lot of us wrestle with today. What are we supposed to do with our ego? And this is where you can really see the modern East meets West tension. In the West, thanks to people like Freud, we think of the ego as the CEO of your personality. It's the part of you that manages your life and stops you from doing crazy things. The whole goal of therapy is often to build a strong, healthy ego. But in many Eastern traditions, that same concept, the ahamkara, is seen as the very source of all our problems. And the goal of practices like mindfulness isn't to strengthen it, but to see that it's just an illusion. And you see this conflict playing out all over the place with modern spiritual teachers who mix Eastern and Western ideas. I mean, look at this table. It's a whole spectrum. You've got some like Pema Chodron who say we should just investigate the ego with curiosity. Others like Lama Surya Das say you have to heal it first. And then you get all the way to the other end with people like Andrew Cohen who call for the total destruction of what he calls the demonic ego. So, who's right? And that leaves us, not with a neat little answer, but with a much better question. After this whole journey, from Plato's eternal soul to Hume's bundle of perceptions, from an empty chariot to the circuits in our brain, we're left with this. Is yourself some kind of fixed thing that you're supposed to find? Or is it more like a story that you are actively writing and rewriting every single day? And that is the question I want to leave you with.